Welcome to today's episode of Modern Learning on the Air. I'm your host, Jeff Brown, and today we have a very special guest, Jane Bosworth. And joining Jane is our very own Karen Vieth. Today we're excited to talk to Jane about her relaunch of her book, From Analysis to Evaluation, Tools, Tips, and Techniques for Trainers, and how it addresses the ever-changing landscape of the learning and development field. So let's get into it.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And Jane, welcome. I'm so excited you're here with us.
Me too.
Would you just take a minute, though, for our audience? I know you, of course, InSync knows you, but would you just take a second just to introduce yourself, give us a few thoughts around kind of where you've been in the industry, but also around your book, From Analysis to Evaluation, Tools, Tips, and Techniques for Trainers that we're going to talk about today.
Well, sure. I'm Jane Bosworth. I'm in North Carolina, and I began my career as a classroom trainer and evolved to that. Also, I wore several hats, including instructional designer for that. And then that evolved into an interest in e-learning and an interest in social learning. And along the way, I was working with no budget. So along the way, I got myself sort of famous in the trade magazines and the blogging world because I was working with no money and I was able to somehow manage to get things done. So that was sort of my foray into the publishing business. And one day my editor at Wiley said, I know that there are trainers out there everywhere who are using their own little self-created questionnaires and models and flowcharts and worksheets and matrices and that kind of thing. Do you think we could get them to help you put those together into a single book, which was a fabulous idea. And we did that. So mostly I'm the editor. I wrote introductions. There are a few pieces of mine in there, but there are contributions from all over the place, including InSync. Now, this was 2008. So we compiled this book. It sold at $75 in 2008. And there had been a promise of an ebook with it that didn't really ever happen. There was a CD with the book, which now seems very quaint. But we never did the e-version. So the book was expensive. It did very well. The people that bought it loved it. And eventually it did go out of print. I mean, we're pushing on 16 years now. So during COVID, we suddenly saw this huge population of teachers desperate to get out of the traditional classroom and move into what they were calling corporate training. I don't know that they always knew what that meant. Corporate training was their goal. And, looking back over the book, it was the content was mostly evergreen. It was mostly about how to design. And then we had this new potential audience of people who had experience delivering instruction and working with learners, but they didn't know much about how to get through meetings with stakeholders like CEOs wanting their photograph on every screen or dancing cats everywhere, or they hadn't had any experience with working with performance improvement problems and needs analysis and unknown audiences and that kind of thing. So I looked through the book and I felt like we could repurpose it for teachers pretty easily and quickly and get it back out as an ebook, but the publisher did not want to do that. So I decided I should do it myself and relaunch it again for a general audience, not just specific to teachers. But I do need to say it is not a new book. It is the 2008 book with a few edits to sort of clean up things we don't believe in anymore and some references to technology that were way out of date. So it is a reissue of the 2008 book. There is not much in the way of new content in it.
Which is why
Right.
we thought we'd bring you on to discuss this as we are, publishing it with you.
Yes.
This idea of, learning and development has taken all these twists and turns, if you will. We've witnessed the evolution from face-to-face training, like you said, to e-learning, to blended learning, to virtual learning, to hybrid learning, and the list goes on, right? But the one thing that's so cool and that has stayed so constant is just learning. And so, Yeah. So when we think about your book and kind of when we brainstormed this with Jennifer Hoffman, it was like relaunching this book from 2008, considering all these twists and turns. And when we talk to you, we think about the influence of the twists and turns, and they didn't really have an influence, did they?
So I looked through the book, and except for a few things, almost everything was, like I said, it was evergreen. Back then, we were looking at tools and worksheets and matrices and templates and stuff that people were working with day to day, one-on-one, at their desk on their job. So there wasn't that much to go out of date. It is very tech agnostic. Because for one thing, thinking of 2008, you either were a wizard using authorware or you were converting PowerPoint to Flash. There wasn't a whole lot going on in the way of, and there still isn't, I don't think. We don't have a lot of worksheets for how to use Storyline. That's not how people work with that product, with the software. So the content was so stable and seemed so evergreen. And what leapt out, yes, is that very little has really changed. Technologies have come and gone. Some of our research has certainly informed better practice. For instance, one of the things I did go back and edit completely out was reference to learning styles. And I think that's a good example of, well, we know better about some things now, and that's one of them. We all had a time when we believed in that a long time ago. And the more research we read, the more studies that were done, the more we realized that that wasn't the right thing. We learned that learners have preferences, but trying to tailor to styles is not an effective way to approach people. We learned more about things like spaced learning. We learned more about things like engagement, but mostly the content stayed very stable, and it made it really easy for me to turn it over to NSYNC to do the final, editing and publication.
It's interesting that you said that, because when I went through the book myself and I saw that the learning preferences were in there, the learning styles, which we call preferences now, were in there. And I wondered, as we were going through this, how you would, adopt or adapt that segment of the chapters. You mentioned the learning methodologies, or we talked about how they've evolved over time. Are there any parts of the book that you can give us some insights into how you addressed any of these types of changes, like the learner styles versus the learner preferences? Did you keep that in, or?
Sometimes it was just a word change from style to preference. And sometimes if they actually just laid out a particular style model, I took it out. Really, very little has changed. You still need basically to find out what people really need to know, what they're not doing well, and how we can help them. And then how to create instruction that does that. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what technology you're using. It doesn't matter which piece of software you're picking. I mean, it's still kind of the same problems confronting us. How to deliver it, how to evaluate it. Those things at their roots didn't change very much.
Okay.
So
no, it's interesting, because the ADDIE model is the ADDIE model, right? And if we follow the ADDIE model, or we even enhance on the ADDIE model, we're constantly looking at the analyzation and the design and the development. How do we go through that process? So, it's just so interesting that if you look at it from that aspect and you start thinking about all the different things, like the elephant in the room of AI, right? It's just another tool.
Right.
So, kind of to take that on, right? Because that is the buzzword out there.
Yeah, and I just want to say, ADDIE, when we were collecting all these things, when I was working on, like I said, it was edited, and I was sending queries out to everybody I knew in the business, and we had hundreds of people sending contributions. The editor said, we need an organizing framework, and everybody's familiar with ADDIE, so let's go with that. And stuff did fit very neatly into 5 chapters that way. It was really easy to put the book together once I sort of had that in front of me. But I do want to, be clear for those who maybe haven't ever given this very much thought. ADDIE is not an instructional design model. It's not a theory. It's a project planner, right? It's, this is how, if you wanted to create a stress management lesson plan, if you want to go invade a foreign land, if you want to build a restaurant, you need to, analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. It's the same. It's a process. And I will say this has nothing to do with anything, and you may decide to cut it, and that's fine. A few years ago, I work now for the Learning Guild. I'm their director of research. And a few years ago, I did a deep dive into the current state of people working in instructional design. What were they doing? What was the work? What was their job title? What was going on? And I found out many times they were wearing many hats. I looked at all these job postings that had soup to nuts requirements, like they would say things like, we must have expertise in PowerPoint or RISE, completely different, disjointed thing. But the one thing that was consistent across every job posting I looked at was project planning, project management skills. So, I think it's an appropriate model to look at. It can be a little clunky, and I address that, in the book. Experienced people know when we talk about ADDIE, some of the steps can overlap, and some of the stuff you may already start a little bit ahead of the analysis, that kind of thing. But yeah, I think it's a useful organizing framework. And it, again, helps people who maybe don't have a huge background in all this make sense of it. I like to talk about instructional design for the real world, which is sometimes different from the way it looks in the books. In the books, because I did many years of grad school in this, in the books, that you have limitless time to analyze, analyze things, and you have limitless access to learners and managers with the right knowledge level, and the CEO will come to orientation every month. It's not very realistic. So this is more, this is what real people were really using in their work in the field all the time.
I think what's one of the things that you mentioned, like the ADDIE model being a process and helping us to navigate, no matter what field you're in, but helping us to navigate these changes, right? All these changes that are happening, whether it's in L&D, from the different technology changes to the different environmental changes to just all the different learner changes that can be out there. I think it is a process that we can kind of keep as a sound tool to be able to apply things to. And I mentioned just a minute ago about, addressing the elephant in the room, that being AI. And as I was going through the book and thinking about all of the different tools that are there, I thought AI is just yet another tool. And I'm curious if there's any impact. How do you see AI impacting any of the tools, any of the tips, any of the techniques for trainers in your book? And maybe what are some, potential benefits and challenges that trainers might encounter with the integration of AI?
I do see some of that. I've always been fascinated with technology, about technology, and I'm not afraid of it. I've always liked it, and I'm not an early adopter, but I'm an early tester. I'll download the free version. I'll look at the app when it's first launched. I'll participate in beta testing and that sort of thing. And so I've been on this road a long, long time, and I am old enough to remember how laser disc players were going to change this whole industry. And what I have seen, back to, I know we're harping on this at this point, but the technologies have come and gone, and I see people who get, and sometimes it's not the L&D department, it's an HR manager who's excited about what was on the cover of SHRM magazine this month, right? They get really excited about something. And I just can't say enough. We need to keep our eye on the ball. Whatever is happening and whatever the technologies, whatever the promise or the hype or our enthusiasm or not about something, at the end of the day, the bottom line for our jobs all the time, it is not how we can teach it, it's how they can learn it. Right? That is what we need to keep in mind. And so whatever we're doing, whatever approach, whatever theory we like, whatever software we think is fun, how can they learn it is really our business. And so when I think about AI, I like AI. I like ChatGPT. I find it very useful, for instance, for organizing my thoughts. If you're approaching, especially a new topic, maybe you don't know a lot about. And I do this a lot when I'm working on research projects. I don't know that much about chatbots. I don't know that much about the ethics of AI, but ChatGPT is a good way to sort of find out what's out there and have an outline. Sort of, these are the big themes. This is what keeps coming up. This is what the most common headlines are. And it helps me sort of get my thoughts together. One of the problems we all have as L&D people, and you've seen this model with me many times, it's in the book, as a matter of fact, either we're starting from nothing and we amass everything in the world, or we know everything in the world. And either way, we've got this huge, huge block of knowledge that we're trying to condense into a module or a session or a half a day or a workshop or something. And it can make it very difficult to know what to focus on, right? Okay. We're trying so hard to get everything in. Again, we maybe lose sight of what that person in the hot seat really has to have today, not to get fired or hurt somebody or kill somebody, right? Or anything like that. So when you think about using it as an organizing framework for AI, the AI as a way to get sort of an outline together, I find that very useful. I will say that in a recent situation, I have had a human editor who I've lost, and I am now working exclusively with generative AI for my work with something, and I have found that it's great for catching grammar and stuff. I have found that very often it will make suggestions that are in fact better than what I wrote. I have to admit it. Sometimes I'm like, okay. All right, that's better. But I will say, when I want to say, we don't usually switch to first person with these things. Do you think that's okay? Or do you think this is too abrupt a change? Am I going too fast with this idea? The AI can't help me with that. The human could help me with those kinds of conversations. And I miss her for that, for a lot of reasons, but that one in particular. So I think we need to understand the limitations. I will say, when I look at what AI can do right now, and I have a pretty good imagination, but right now I see what it can do. If your job and the expectation of the people that pay you is that you will take some text and put it on some screen and maybe make it pretty and maybe have a quiz, yeah, I think there's going to be problems for those people. I think that people that are used to that or that have been getting paid, again, it may not be their call to do it that way. I've worked for people that didn't want anything but copying the policy onto a screen. I mean, I get it. But I do think we're going to see job changes because of that. I hope people find a way to land on their feet. But I also have to say, if the technology can do that, then I can't say we shouldn't, right? I can't say, we need to figure out other ways to add our value. And I will say the book probably doesn't address that much. Maybe that's a chapter we need to add soon. Because here's the thing with an ebook is you can make it bigger later.
So I want to pick up on something that you said. Yeah. You said something about learners using the technology. Learners, it's not about us putting technology into something, but it's really how the learner is able to use it.
Well, that too. What I think I said was, it's not so much how can we teach it, but how can they learn it?
How can they learn it?
But I do think, I see on the one hand a lot of underestimating what learners are able and willing and like doing versus what I do see sometimes maybe we overestimate what they can take. Sometimes like a year ago, or a while back, there was a football game that was not going to be on regular TV. It was going to be streaming, and the only instructions were scan the QR code on your TV to get to it. Is this ringing a bell? That is not good enough for everybody. That's not enough information for a lot of people. I could do it. You could probably do it. So I think we need to be really careful when we talk about the learners using the technology, that we know who they are and what their skill level is and whether they're going to need help, and making sure the technology we give them is good, right?
Well, I think that speaks back to the whole purpose of the AI conversation that we had, the human element, the human mind. Now, AI might take, and there was some research that I just read and it escapes me, but it was like by 2030, 30% of the jobs will be automated. And I am like, okay, that's kind of cool. That allows for our human minds to just elevate even more, right? And so when I think about that, I think about the implementation and how important it is for us to be able to use some of these tools within, your book, right? And be able to then think about all these different changes and how do I implement AI and how do I take that piece here and take this piece here and put it together. And that's where the human mind is so much more powerful. And it kind of leads me to my next topic that I kind of want to pick your brain about is, so there's technology changes, then there's environment changes, right? We've gone through the face-to-face to virtual to e-learning to blended, and now we've got this hybrid environment, right? And so if we think about the tools and tips and techniques that you reference in the book as well, should trainers be particularly mindful in thinking through the hybrid environment as it outlines, as the tools are outlined in your book? Is there anything you can think of that would help the reader when they think about hybrid learning environments, that these tools might be impactful around that?
I like to answer a question you haven't asked before I go on to answer the one you did. You did ask. But what I was thinking about really while you were talking is that when it comes down to using a technology and needing the human brain, this is where a designer's skill comes in where maybe the automated put the text on the slide and make it pretty does not. I mean, that is kind of automated work anyway, even if you're the human doing it. It's kind of mindless. And people who do it don't usually stay in those jobs long, as in my experience. But, one thing that happens, and you go to a lot of technology-based conferences too, educational tech conferences, the minute someone's, and I was in this is an example. I was in a session one time, I don't know, 5 years ago, where somebody was talking about using AR as a training tool, using AI and using an app and that kind of. Before the person started talking, a hand went up and someone said, "Is there a quick, easy tool for this yet?" Here's the thing. These people had not heard, they didn't know anything about AR. They didn't understand applications of AR. They didn't understand what was really involved in building something good and not just having jumping frogs all over your classroom, right? That kind of thing. But what happens with that, and your listeners are going to understand this, the viewers today will know this, is somebody goes back to work, they make a cheap, quick version of something that isn't right, that isn't good, that isn't well constructed, that isn't well thoughtful. It doesn't work. Everybody hates it. It fails all the time. Nobody uses it. And then management says, well, we tried AR and it didn't work. So bring us something. And what they tried was not AR. It was some watered down version of it. I have no problem with the product being inexpensive or easy, but I see people leaping immediately to an application that's not good. I see it all the time with chatbots. There are great chatbots, but you cannot build them alone at your desk in 45 minutes. Right? And that's what they want to do. It's nothing. And they're terrible. And you get frustrated and angry about it. So anyway, about the hybrid thing, I get in trouble for this. I'll probably get in trouble today. COVID had a real big silver lining, and it was called, we didn't have to argue anymore about classroom versus online versus virtual. We didn't have to, we had fought about it for 20 years, Karen Vieth, you and I, both of us. And suddenly it just went away. And maybe they didn't like it, and maybe they didn't want it, and maybe they didn't do it really well, but we overcame all of those obstacles literally overnight. I mean, it was crazy how fast it happened. It was crazy. And so I am hopeful that we have accepted it's just one more way of doing things, and it's not weird, and it's not traveling to Mars. The thing is, the book, although I said it was evergreen, it was fairly tech agnostic, we do have templates for virtual instructor-led training in there that didn't really need much updating. I mean, we were doing it then. It just hadn't been adopted then, right? As widely as it is now. So I don't remember whether we edited that one or not. I believe I gave Jennifer Hoffman contributed that. I believe she had the choice, but I don't think we had to make many changes at all. So the uptake is there. And now that the technology is in place, people are ready to use it. So I'm hoping that those materials will be good for people. But, you're one of your people, Chip Dye, at InSync Training, did a lot of work. His dissertation work was on engagement and the different effects environments can have. We just need to remember, and I think I'll get this right, it's really an encapsulation. I'm really cutting what he said, but basically we need to understand engagement isn't somebody being not bored for 90 minutes. Engagement means they're engaging with the program, engaging with a person. They're actually involved in something going on. We haven't lost them with an idea they disagreed with. Or if they did, we were there to talk with them about it and keep them involved. So did that make sense? I think that's more, when we use that word, what we're talking about the fact that the environment does matter, and whatever we do with our people, again, how can they learn this, and how can we do more than just give them the dancing cats or whatever the entertainment thing has been touted.
Right. Well, and one of the things that Dr. Dye's research brought out is that the only way to be successful in the hybrid environment is to design and deliver specific for that environment. It's not just pulling face-to-face and virtual together and saying it's good enough. It really has to be designed and delivered specific to that environment. So if I think about the different tools and tech tips and techniques in your book, I think about they are evergreen. And it's, again, up to us as individuals to really start pulling that together and looking at the hybrid learning environment, looking at the engagement model, and looking to see how do we engage within the environment we're given, whether it's Zoom, whether it's face-to-face, or whether it's the hybrid environment where we have to make sure that we're looking at all those individuals. It kind of goes back to where we started, Jane. It's not about e-learning, face-to-face learning, virtual learning, hybrid learning. It's about learning. And the one thing that I think we can all agree on is that the only constant, I guess, in life is change. And it's how we adapt to it, right? And how we take the tips and tricks and techniques and methodologies that we know that work in learning and development. It's what we do with those within the changing technologies and people and skill sets and platforms that really will make us successful as we move throughout L&D.
And, the thing is, technologies have come and gone. Like we said, I have yet to see anything truly revolutionized because the learning hasn't changed. How people learn hasn't really changed. We know more about it than we used to. And I think maybe the learners have changed a bit, excuse me, in the sense that they better understand how they learn. They better understand self-directed learning. They're able to make some of their own choices, like going to YouTube. But one of the things we ran into while we were doing battle with, we could do this virtually, right, was this idea of we want people to convert our classroom training to virtual. And what they meant was literally take everything from the traditional classroom and somehow make it available via one of the virtual tools. You remember, and that was a big push during COVID too. It wasn't always done well, and we had to really sort of struggle with helping people understand. Well, it's not a one-to-one shift. There are things we can do in a traditional classroom that are harder to do virtually. There are things that are better virtually than they are face-to-face. That was one of the things that was hard to get people to see. But helping them understand. Sometimes it meant some redesign. Sometimes it meant swapping out an activity, swapping out, the way a discussion was led. It was not often, again, night and day shifting, but it wasn't just a one-to-one transfer of that kind of stuff. But we ran into that quite a bit. And I know, people, I got approached quite a lot about doing some work doing that. Honestly, I was too busy. I didn't really have time for it. But one of the things that we learned along the way, because you and I, again, have been doing this a long time, I used to do some sessions, as all of you did, on making the virtual classroom more engaging, for lack of a better word. And people would tell me, people who were using, and I am going to name some names, people who were using WebEx would tell me they didn't have a chat tool.
Wow.
Or they would say, we can't do breakout rooms. I'm like, yeah, you don't even know what you have. You don't even know what you don't, you don't know, Or they would say, well, we never thought to ask people questions, or, well, our people just want to present. So, just learning to use the tools you have. It's like being in a traditional classroom and learning to write well on a flip chart, learning how to use a PowerPoint, deck efficiently, how to turn it on and off, how to use it for questions, how to not just stand there reading. It's the same thing when you move to any other environment. And that includes VR, which we haven't talked about yet, which I think is very cool and sexy, but I also like AR better. But you have to adapt things for whatever environment that you're delivering in. And again, what is the way these people can learn this information best, right? And perform.
It's kind of like evergreen skills, evergreen tools. We just have to take a look at what we know to be tried and true and then adapt it to the new sexy thing that is out there.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jane, for sharing your insights with us today. We look forward to the relaunch of your book.
Me too, yay!
End of June, if individuals would like to come to our upcoming webinar, and then middle of July for the public. So again, thank you so much, Jane.
Thanks.
Look forward to the next chapters.
Yay, me too.
Thank you for tuning into Modern Learning on the Air. For all your training and services needs, visit us at insynctraining.com. And don't forget to sign up for our monthly webinars, where we cover key topics and trends in the learning and development space. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.